Hey, HCOM 100 scholars, this is Professor Denham. This is a video for Chapter 1 of your textbook in Real Communication. As you already know, I've provided Chapter 1 for you on our Canvas page. If you haven't yet received your course textbook, you can use the chapter that's provided for you on our Canvas page. I've already addressed this before, but a few students asked about getting a different edition of the text. So yeah, I'm teaching from the 4th, but a lot of you have the 5th. So when I reference page numbers, they might be a little bit different based upon the version that you have. So as I mentioned in the instructions for this Canvas module, I definitely recommend that you've already read the chapter prior to listening to this, because I'm only touching on certain parts of the chapter. I'm not covering everything, and I don't necessarily go in the exact same order as the chapter. Anyhow, definitely recommend that you've read it before and that you've already read through the PowerPoint, and then have your book out in front of you, or if you have an e-version, like have it up in front of you. I recommend looking at things and taking notes, and so that's that. So look at this first slide of stuff, slide 2, the transactional communication model. I'm referencing a part of the chapter that starts on page 17, where it says modeling communication, the linear model, the interaction model, and then the competent communication model. So in the 4th edition, that's on page 17, it says modeling communication. It looks like this. Over here. Okay, so I'm skipping ahead to there to kind of go over the basic model of communication, which is inherent in our everyday interactions that we've been a part of our entire lives. So I'll skip ahead just to the competent communication model, which is the transactional model of communication. I just focus on that just to encompass everything. So there's a lot of wheels in motion with this particular communication model. So you have a sender, a receiver, and in the model that you see in the PowerPoint slide is a little bit different than the model that you see in the textbook, but nevertheless you have two people interacting, where you have one's the producer of messages, and the other one is the receiver of those messages, which then once that person interprets that message, then they provide feedback, and then they're producing messages and they're going back and forth. And so you have a lot of components. You have a message, which is what you're saying, and you have the channel. The channel is the vehicle that transmits the message from one person to another. It's like a conduit. So it's the spoken voice in a face-to-face interaction. It's the spoken voice, or a text message would be like your phone. That'd be the channel. In this case, the channel I'm using to get to you is a recorded video. A handwritten letter is a channel. So you get the idea. The channel is the thing that transmits the message from one person to the next. And then within that, you have the context or the situation. You have the cultural context, situational context, relational context, like where your conversation is taking place, whether that's in the library or in your car as you're driving, or at church, or on a date, or in a group of 100 people, or just the two of you by yourself. All those different things, and your backgrounds and your cultures and the nature of your relationship, all those things affect the way that you both produce messages and the way that you receive messages, the way that you decode and make sense out of messages and provide feedback. And so this feedback, this interaction between two people, it's called a feedback loop. And what you're doing is you're engaging in the co-creation of meaning. So the question is, like, what is meaning? Meaning is not something that it's not words. It's like meaning is understood through interacting with another person. In other words, I can't just like transfer my thoughts from my head to your head. It's just it's complicated. But anyways, that's what's happening when two people are interacting. They're co-creating, like the nature of their relationship, or what they're going to do in the future, or business partners. They're co-creating meaning. Let's say how to run their business or something like that. So I want to give you a detailed overview of like the basic model of communication, and then you have interference, like noise. If there's like physical loud noise that could affect your interaction, or psychological noise, emotional noise. Maybe you're in a good mood, you're in a bad mood, you're hungry, you're angry, you're tired, you're excited, you're fidgety, like me all the time. But all those different things, again, affect the way that you produce messages and the way that you receive messages. Lots of things going on. So one thing that I think that's fun to do is to watch how this is played out in a film. So in this PowerPoint presentation on slide 2, you'll see in the notes section, I have a YouTube link. So it's a 2-minute, it's like a 2.5-minute video from the film Crocodile Dundee, one of the best classic 80s movies. But in this scene, it's one of the final scenes. It's in my opinion, like a really funny, humorous way to illustrate the communication model. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but if you're interested in watching it, watch it. Like in light of what I just said, in light of what's in the textbook, watch this final scene of how these two people communicate. I just want you to appreciate the humorous application of the communication model within the subway station in New York City. Anyhow, moving along to just a definition of communication. So I want you to think of your own, like how would you define communication on your own? Just kind of come up with that, write it down, what's your own definition of communication, and then we'll move on. By the way, something I have in the notes in this Canvas module is that I recommend considering trying to listen to the YouTube video at an increased speed, either like 1.5, 1.75, 2.0, whatever you're able to do. I started doing that more recently, and I'm just spending less time listening to videos when it comes to these types of things. When I'm listening things back, play back like my own stuff, it's fast, but like our brains can handle it. Anyways, just something to think about. So our book provides a definition on slide 4, working definition, the process of using signs, symbols, and behaviors to transfer information. I'd say it's a working definition because it's sort of always changing. It's always evolving. There's not just one constant. It's transferring information from one human to the next. And as humans have evolved, we've developed new and more ways to transfer information. So the overall definition of communication is like always evolving, considering the way that we as humans come up with ways to communicate. The authors also say that it's the process through which the social fabric of relationships, organizations, and societies is created and maintained. So any group of friends that you're in, or a group of coworkers, or a business, and you have like a set of policies or structures, even like in friend groups, how you dress and the way you talk to each other, and when you greet each other, do you hug, do you high five, do you kiss on the cheek, do you like fist bump? How do you greet each other? Do you have a method? And all those things are sort of negotiated through communication. Not that you have a list of formal policies in your group of friends, although, you know, if you did, no judgment, but in general, you just figure those things out. You figure those things out through multiple interactions, but it's all through communication. So that's you know, encompassing quite a bit. Okay, on to slide 6. So why would you study communication? One, it gives you a new look at a familiar topic. One of the things about this class, our class in particular, is that when we talk about these topics about relationships and culture and body language and persuasion and social influence, there's times when students, they raise their hand, they say like, oh my gosh, I learned about this in my psychology class, or this is something that happened at work, or yeah, my manager had that same policy, or we tried that sales tactic. And so there's so many students who have that aha moment where like, oh my gosh, yeah, I didn't know that that was a label for that experience that I had in that relationship, or for, you know, what I was experiencing when I was giving my speech, but now you have an actual label for it. So it gives you a new look at a familiar topic. And then also, everyone benefits when we communicate more effectively. Generally speaking, if you're communicating effectively, which means, like, let's say competently, which means that you're communicating effectively and appropriately, if you're doing it the right way, pretty much everyone always benefits. Of course, defining what it means to communicate effectively and competently is a fairly like broad topic. It's also ubiquitous. So communication is everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's going to be some sort of like need for understanding a unique component of communication, whether you're an entrepreneur and you have your own business, or you're working on an office of 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people. No matter what you do in life, you're going to be engaging in some form of communication, whether it's face-to-face, in person, written, a lot of virtual stuff, but nevertheless, it's everywhere. And then it's consequential. So one of the components of communication is that there's this characteristic called consequentiality. So the consequentiality of communication is the idea that there are real consequences for the ways that we engage in behavior, for the ways that we utilize communication concepts effectively or ineffectively. There's real consequences. It has real effects on people's lives and how they process information and how it affects their body chemistry. So that's one unique component of communication, is that there are consequences. It does matter how we speak. So I have another video clip to illustrate this from the TV show Sex and the City. So FYI, this particular video clip has profanity in it. There's a number of clips I'll show in this class. Some have profanity, some don't. In general, I don't show you things that are like grotesque or anything like that, but many of the clips that I show might have profanity because they're from TV shows or movies like HBO shows and whatnot. Anyhow, just want you to know. So in this particular clip with Sex and the City, this is a clip where Carrie is the main character. That's the main person you see. That's who you can see in the screenshot, and then of course you'll understand the context of what's going on in the clip. You might be able to play the video within the screen, and I also have the link, the YouTube link, in the comment section of this slide 7. So as you're watching this, you'll learn about how Carrie's boyfriend broke up with her. So her boyfriend broke up with her over a Post-it note. So there's real consequences for the ways that you end relationships. And in this particular example, the major, the significant impact or the significant component of this is the fact that it's the channel that the person used. So reflecting back to the communication model, it's the channel that had such a powerful impact on how Carrie processed it. Because the channel he used was a Post-it note. That's how he communicated the message of, hey, I want to end this relationship. I want to break up with you. And the way I'm doing it is leaving it on a Post-it note. And it's, I mean, it's humorous and whatnot in the episode. I mean, in my opinion, it's humorous. If you don't find it humorous, that's okay. But I think it is. As you're watching it, what I want you to take notes on is the following. So think about the consequences of this particular communication exchange. The consequences of Berger breaking up with Carrie over a Post-it note. So what are the consequences for Carrie? You can just like write on your notes or something like that, like Carrie, and then write like short-term consequences and long-term consequences. And then write Berger on the other hand, and write short-term consequences and long-term consequences. And then as you're watching this clip, write things down that make you think of like how this potentially could be consequential, how it could negatively impact both of them. And maybe watch it a second time. I mean, this is for your own enrichment. You're not turning anything in, but I emphasize the importance of seeing how like a course concept is illustrated in a TV show because it helps us to make sense out of it more. But anyways, you might pause the video now and then just watch this and try to do that, right? Like try to think like if this happened to me, or if I knew of something like this that happened to someone, how does that really impact someone? Like getting broken up with over a Post-it note. In that particular way, like she didn't get closure, right? That's like a short-term consequence. For Berger, he had freedom. He was like, oh, okay, that was easy. That was an easy way to end the relationship. That's a short-term consequence for him. But for long-term consequence for someone like him, maybe he would have guilt. Maybe he would be reinforced. Maybe the fact that he could get away with it, maybe it reinforces that behavior. Who knows? There's a variety of things that might happen, but the point is to think of the types of consequences that could happen from watching, or after watching this video clip. Think of the consequences that could happen if that were to happen in real life. Anyhow, moving along. On to slide 8. So those are some of the reasons why you should study communication, other than the fact that it's a required course. It makes you a more informed communicator in general. You have a better understanding, a greater like depth and breadth of understanding of human interaction and human behavior. So that I would argue that's a good thing to know. And then there's the functional perspective. What are the functions that communication serves? What are the goals? Like how does communication help us accomplish goals? So that's on page 5. Where it says, on the bottom of page 5, it says, we must communicate functions, essential living. Then it goes on and says, expressing affiliation, managing relationships, influencing others. So I want you to just review those terms, or review the first few sentences in each section. Expressing affiliation. The feeling of being liked, cared for, loved, that you matter. That's what's expressing affiliation. Like how do I communicate to someone how I feel about them? In my in-person class that I teach, that's something that a lot of people talked about in terms of wanting to do that better. Like I want to get better at expressing my emotions. Like I know how I feel. Like you're feeling things all day long in your heart, in your head, and your heart is constantly communicating with your head, with your brain. So you're feeling things. So the question is, how do I express it? Well, through communication skills. But communication helps us to express things, helps us to manage relationships and influence other people. And that's one of the things that would be doing that for a big chunk of your life is managing relationships in the workplace. No matter what your job is, again, if you're an entrepreneur or you're a teacher or you're a business owner, you're a stay-at-home parent, you're managing relationships and you're influencing people. Whether your crowd is a group of kids who are ages 1 to 5 or a group of adults, you're managing people. So learning how to use communication well is imperative. So I want you to so here's a real life application of what I'm talking about. I want you to click on that link for that Psychology Today article. You might be able to just directly click on that link in slide 9, or you might just have to copy and paste the link into a new browser and open it up. And I recommend reading through this whole thing on your own at some point, but I just want to highlight some of the things. It's not a really long article. So I highlight a few things on slide 10. I just copied and pasted from the article, not plagiarizing, just so you know. So they talk about the fact that the heart has 40,000 neurons and the ability to process, learn, and remember. It has its own emotions. I mean, that's pretty powerful. I don't really know what neurons are that much, but it just sounds like that's probably a powerful thing. But for an organ in your body to be able to process, learn, and remember things, and it has its own emotions, like that's pretty significant, but that's not the most significant part of this. What they talk about is positive emotions that you experience, things that you express, things that people tell you, such as compassion and love. They generate a harmonious pattern in the heart's rhythm, leading to coherence and greater emotional regulation. So that emotional regulation, that's a hyperlink, it's a hyperlink within slide 10. You can click on that. It gives you a little definition of what that is. These things are powerful because when you apply these things, when you're reading this article and you're trying to practice what they're talking about, it can help to relax you, reduce your oftentimes hyper aware or like anxious state of mind that can calm down, and then it increases things like learning, making better choices, and expanded view of options. And so that's good. But I think the most significant thing about this article is where it said how powerful the heart's energy is. So it said the heart's energy is said to reach about 3 feet outside the physical body and can be felt by another person. They actually can use an instrument, an ECG, electrocardiogram. They can use that instrument to actually record the heart's pattern. But besides that, the question is that they have this, example, like, have you ever been talking to someone, sit next to one, you just feel this like intense, like positive energy? Or the opposite, you've been around someone who's being so negative and so critical, and you feel this like intense negative energy. I'm sort of oversimplifying how this works, but the point is, like, your heart-brain connection is very powerful. And the question to you is, like, are you aware of that? Are you aware of your heart-brain connection and how your heart is communicating to your brain? What they say in the article is, whatever the heart informs the brain responds accordingly. So whatever the heart informs the brain responds accordingly. So what your heart is communicating to your brain's responding accordingly, and that's affecting your daily living. So communication helps with that, right? How do I communicate in a way such that I can have a more positive heart-brain connection? There's all kinds of things you can do. Read books like read those types of articles, and of course there's books like that. Reach out to me because I have quite a few books on this topic, and I'm interested in it. Okay, moving along to slide 11, the characteristics of communication. So there's all kinds of characteristics. It's transactional, right? In the sense that it's two-way communication. Like right now, what you're experiencing with me is one-way communication, or in a physical classroom, I'm talking to the students and the students are listening, and that's just one-way communication. The way I actually teach is there's a lot of me stopping and me interacting. But the transactional nature of communication is a characteristic. So it's just this exchange of messages. It's linked to culture, like the things that you say, how you understand things, it's all linked to culture. When I lived in the South for 5 years, I lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana for 5 years. And when I first moved there's obvious use of people saying ma'am, sir, y'all, and whatnot. And that was hard for me to get to learn how to like properly do that, because I didn't want to sound funny. I didn't want to sound weird, because there's a particular way that you're supposed to do that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you'll just have to take my word for it. But if you're from the South or you've been around the South, you know that there's a certain way that they use terms like ma'am and sir and y'all. I have interstate there because I was asking someone when I lived in Baton Rouge, I was trying to get my bearings in one place, and I asked someone like, hey, can you tell me where the 10 freeway is? And the guy looked at me, he's like, what? And I said, can you tell me how to get to the 10 East? And he looked at me and he said, oh, you mean the interstate? And I was like, yep, the interstate. They don't call it the 10. They don't call it the freeway. They don't call freeways by numbers. They just say the interstate. Because there's just one, for the most part, there's just one interstate that connects state to state, interstate. Anyhow, that's all part of the culture, right? The language is tied to the culture. Communication can be unintentional or intentional. It's irreversible, right? Once we say something, we can't take it back. It can be unintentional in the sense of, like, let's say I'm walking by someone. If I'm walking by you and I see that you winked at me, some people might say, like, oh, that means they're expressing romantic interest. It might mean that the person's expressing romantic interest. It might mean that the person had something in their eye. It might mean that the person was, I don't know, like they thought I was someone else, right? There's a variety of things it could mean. So you might say that's unintentional. If I decoded something the wrong way, it's unintentional communication. That's one way to think about it. So there's so many channels of communication, but they matter, right? The power and impact of channels on communication is very powerful, like the Post-it note. And then there's the content and relational dimension of communication. So the content is what you say, relational is how you say it. So I want you to look at slide 12 where it has this sign. So imagine that you're at a restaurant, slide 12. Imagine that you're sitting in a restaurant and all of a sudden you look up and you read this sign right here. So right now, read this on your own. Read it out loud, read it in your head. Customers who think our waiters are rude should see the manager. So if I saw that, I would probably, I mean, I'm asking you what you would think, but as it's written, I would think that that means that's a directive, right? If I think that the waiter is rude, if I think I'm getting bad service or the waiter's being rude to me, then I should go talk to the manager and report it. So there really is no relational dimension to that because there's really nothing emphasized. But we might read a sign differently, right? And another way that that sign can be read is like this. It's the same sentence, but I emphasize a few words and I give you a clue, right? Customers who think our waiters are rude should see the manager. In other words, the manager is extremely rude, right? Way more rude than the waiters. I'm over exaggerating, obviously, but the fact of the matter is I might read it one way, you might read it another way. And it's not because of the sign itself. It's just because of my own cultural dimensions, my background in restaurants. I worked in a lot of restaurants, worked for a lot of managers. Some were great and some weren't great. So if I read that sign, I might, in my own cultural lens of my brain, I might interpret it in a completely different way than you interpret it. This is just one small sample of the content and relational dimension of communication as it relates to a cultural background. So hopefully that makes sense and helps you understand the significance of your cultural background and whatnot. Okay. So on to communication competence. It's process oriented. In order to be to technically be communication, to be a competent communicator, according to communication scholars, is that you need to be both effective and appropriate. You can be effective and get the job done, but perhaps not appropriate. Maybe there's a boss that's very good at getting the numbers in to get the sales done, right? But the staff doesn't appreciate the boss. Perhaps the boss is a jerk and says inappropriate things. My dad, unfortunately, worked for someone like this for several years, where the boss would just say really inappropriate stuff, a lot of inappropriate communication going on. But hey, they had good sales. My dad had good sales overall as a whole. The office did great, but a lot of issues with how they were treating each other and whatnot. You can learn communication skills. There's all kinds of communication skills you can learn and practice and incorporate into your conversations, into conflict negotiation, into, let's say, a sales pitch or working with a friend or trying to get someone to do you a favor, right? There's all kinds of things that you can do in practice to become more competent in your communication behaviors. And then, of course, it involves ethical decisions. Sometimes you're forced to make a decision. If let's say in the workplace, you see someone do something, or you catch some sort of error, you catch something that's unethical. Do you become a whistleblower? Do you report someone? Do you become the person who is the reason why someone else lost their job? Not that it's your fault, but you're reporting them because maybe you're obligated to report them. If you withhold that, what are the consequences? So when it comes to ethical decisions, a lot of times we're relying on being a competent communicator. anyhow, so everyone's background in terms of morals, values, attitudes, it affects how they basically make ethical decisions when it comes to when it's related to communication competence. So I have another clip, another film clip. I like to use film clips to illustrate things quite a bit. So this next clip is on slide 16. So this is a clip from the film Swimming with Sharks, and Kevin Spacey's character is playing a big Hollywood producer, and the other main person is the intern. And in this scene, there's a good amount of profanity, and basically Kevin Spacey's character is being like a real jerk to this intern. So considering what we just watched, I mean, what we just talked about with communication competence, take notes on the degree to which Kevin Spacey's character, the main person, the manager, the one who's being pretty unkind, take notes on the degree to which he's being effective or ineffective, and the degree to which what he's doing is appropriate and inappropriate, and try to have like a neutral attitude. But I encourage you to watch this and try to have a neutral disposition towards it, but also keep in mind that this kind of thing is not too far from reality. In other words, I think it's fairly realistic that this type of exchange does happen, unfortunately, sometimes in the workplace. Probably not as much now as it did back then. This film takes place in the, I think, like the mid-90s. So there's better things in practice now, but this is fairly realistic. Yeah, so just think about it, watch it, ponder it, and whatnot. Okay, moving on. So the last part of this lecture, I'm just going to focus on theory, basically the way that knowledge is produced. I'm pretty much done talking about the chapter, but I'm moving on to just a more broader explanation of the way that information and knowledge is produced and how it's made, and how people come up with ideas and turn those ideas into theories and outcomes and whatnot. So a theory is something that is explaining phenomena, and phenomena are things that are extraordinary, not just some random relationship, but we're looking at things that are extraordinary phenomena. And the thing that makes them extraordinary is the fact that we can measure them, we can write about them, we can apply all kinds of quantitative research methods to come up with all kinds of very significant and sophisticated statistical outputs, right? That's what makes this sort of extraordinary. So on to slide 19. There's two types of theory I'll talk about. There's folk theory, and then there's scientific theory. So scientific theory, slides 19 and 20. So folk theory is you make observations and you generate hypotheses. Maybe you engage in people watching, and you try to imagine how two people are acting, and you try to make predictions about the nature of the relationship. That's folk theory. You might say like, oh, because they're holding hands and they're smiling, they're probably in a good relationship, or they just started dating, or they look like they've been dating for 5 years. So people try to do these things where they observe behaviors and they try to make predictions of what it means. Like they're trying to make predictions of what they see and what it means. And they might be accurate. You might be good. You might be accurate. But you can take that folk theory and turn it into scientific theory. Because scientific theory is the same process. You make observations, and then you generate hypotheses based on theoretical models, based on theories related to the topic. You're making an informed decision about the types of hypotheses. You need a theoretical justification and rationale for why you're testing certain things. So that's what makes it a little more complicated than just people watching. Oftentimes it's anecdotal, like, oh, I bet if they're holding hands and they're probably in a relationship. That's anecdotal, right? And then in scientific theory, you can test that anecdote. And then the outcomes can be used to scientifically support your argument. So when your hypotheses are supported in a research experiment, it's not that what you did proves that you were right, but what it does is it provides a reasonable account for explaining some sort of phenomenon, and you're using appropriate theoretical models and appropriate quantitative research methods, meeting specific types of parameters, and so on and so forth. And then it gets published in some sort of whatever you're writing about, hand-holding and how that relates to relationship satisfaction, right? You write about it, you submit your writings to a peer-reviewed journal, and then that is in turn published in some sort of scholarly journal. And then the people who write textbooks, they're reading those types of articles from peer-reviewed journals, and they're writing about them in the textbooks that you read for our class and for most of your classes, for the most part, especially the social sciences, like and the arts, humanities, philosophy, English, and stuff like that. So that's how knowledge is produced. That's how you're getting it. And I wanted to explain the process, have a more in-depth explanation of that process. So that's that. So here's an example of a classic study done called the Pygmalion effect. This is testing a scientific theory which had real consequences. So as you watch this video, keep in mind that the nature of the study, when it was done, it was very unethical. They're basically testing out the impact of teachers who pay special attention to only one group of students in a classroom. The question is how that impact those students. Are they going to perform better? They did perform better because of the nature of the design of the experiment. These certain groups of students within these classes over the course of the entire academic year, they performed significantly better than everyone else. So everyone else was basically disenfranchised. So that's what makes it unethical, but it was done a long time ago. And now there's measures in place to prevent that type of research from being done. Nevertheless, it's a classic study that illustrates like the power of the scientific model applied in a real life setting. So as much as I don't agree with the nature of the design, the results still provide like a very, very rich understanding of the scientific model and of course the nature of communication behaviors from teachers and how that impacts students. I encourage you to watch that to sort of have the aha moment, like, okay, that's how it all works, like how the scientific model works. So testing scientific theory. Slide 22, you make predictions, generate hypotheses, right? You design your methods, you collect the data, you analyze the data, you write about the data, you revise your ideas, you revise your theory, you revise like the way you're doing things based upon the output that you get. And then, you continue research in a certain topic. So that is that. That's a lot. Hope you're all doing well, and I will talk to you later.